At the center, we have Mr. Kwok Yam Yong, Regional Commander of NT North. On his left-hand side, we have Mr. Kong Wing Cheng, Acting Chief Superintendent of PPRB. On the left-hand side of Mr. Kong, we have Wong Wai Shen, Senior Superintendent of Operations Bureau. On the right-hand side of Mr. Yam, we have Mr. Ng Chong Heng, Senior Superintendent of Crime Wings Headquarters. And then next to him, Mr. Chen Chi Yong, Senior Superintendent of Information Systems Wing. The speakers will say something first before we open the floor to questions. Please raise your hands. I will hand over the microphone to you. Please identify yourselves and also your agency, and each can ask up to 3 questions. Without further ado, I give the floor to Mr. Kwok. Thank you. In the past 4 months, the rioters have been escalating their violence. They commit crimes wearing masks. They are barbarious and brutal. They have dealt a serious blow to the law and order of Hong Kong. Anyone or agencies or shops making comments not pleasing the ears of the rioters will cause vigilantism, and then they may be beaten until they bled, and then they might be hurled petrol bombs, and their shops may be subject to arson. And then they have also set up illegal roadblocks in various districts, and they even intercept drivers and search their personal belongings, including mobile phones. The violence knows no bottom line, and as a result, we have a sense of panic in the community. I'd like to show you some footage first. We've prepared some photos, and as I proceed, I'll show you the situation, and please refer to the monitor. So in the past 5 years in a row, we have seen more widespread and serious damages across the city, and they're very organized and targeted in nature. And many districts have been seriously damaged. The rioters are very targeted in damaging specific shops in MTR stations and banks, and they set fire to shops, they ran into restaurants, causing patrons to feel frightened, and they even burst into tears. And their action was very organized. They announced on the internet that at a specific time there would be mass destruction and damage in different districts of the community, and many incidents show that they indeed have the organization to put their plans into action. Some MTR shops, malls, and shops have been damaged by rioters, or they're worried for the safety of their staff, so they had to close or to close early, and this has seriously disrupted the lives of our residents.
Since last Friday, in 4 days, more than 200 shops or public facilities were vandalized by the rioters, including 40 MTR and light rail stations, close to 100 shops or banks, and some offices of district councillors and government buildings. The situation was appalling. The cases fell under the categories of criminal damage, arson, and burglary. In one of the cases, on the evening on the 6th of October, rioters vandalized one Chinese restaurant, and they were stopped by the police when they tried to flee, and 23 people were arrested on burglary and taking part in an unlawful assembly. On the other hand, rioters also dug up the roads and vandalized traffic lights with construction vehicles. The Transport Department pointed out that at least 80 sets of traffic lights were damaged, which seriously affected the safety of road users. This morning, we saw that traffic was chaotic. There were long queues of vehicles everywhere. People who had to go to school or work were seriously affected, and this is a result of the vandalizing acts of the rioters. What is more appalling was that some rioters unlawfully intercepted vehicles on the road to inspect the personal items and phones of drivers and passengers. These people said that the act was to isolate off-duty police officers or members of the public who hold opposite views. We want to stress that such blatant acts of crime would be prosecuted with loitering, taking part in an unlawful assembly, or criminal intimidation. Once convicted, the maximum penalty of loitering would be 2 years of imprisonment, while for the remaining 2 offences, the maximum sentence is 5 years. The police have stepped up patrol on roads, and in the last few days, at least 5 locations, including Tuen Mun, Yuen Long, Tsuen Wan, Tseung Kwan O, and Eastern District, we have attempted to crack down on illegal roadblocks. 19 people were arrested, including 17 males and 2 females aged between 13 and 32, and they were allegedly taking part in an unlawful assembly, using facial covering in an unlawful assembly, possession of offensive weapon, and obstruction of discharge of duty by police officers. With regards to any unlawful acts, the police would crack down on the relevant behaviors in all viable manner. If members of the public encounter or see illegal roadblocks on the road, please call 999 immediately, and the police would send officers to deal with the situation. In the last 2 days, rioters also crazily attacked members of the public with no regards to their lives. In the last 2 days, in areas like Mong Kok and Shan Shui Po, rioters surrounded members of the public, and many victims were bleeding heavily. And at Shan Shui Po, after a traffic accident, a taxi driver was dragged off the vehicle by masked people, and he was battered, and he bled and laid unconscious on the ground. No matter what happens in a civilized society, problems should be resolved in a civilized manner, and the laws of Hong Kong do not permit vigilantism. We point out that if rioters batter citizens or beat them to death, this would constitute murder instead of rioting. And on the other hand, police officers have been targeted and people were going for the kill. And in the process, both police officers and innocent people were hurt. And on the afternoon on the 6th of October, and at Wan Chai, when the police was dispersing the crowd, rioters constantly hurled petrol bombs at the police cordon. 2 reporters were unfortunately hit, and the head of a reporter was set ablaze. On the evening on the 4th of October, a group of mass rioters in Yuen Long battered a casual clothes officer with no protective helmet or gear, and he lay prone on the ground. In the past, for example, at Tai Ho Road of Tsuen Wan on the 1st of October, after the police open fire, rioters would disperse, but at Yuen Long on the 4th of October, even after the police opened fire, the rioters did not heed the warning and did not stop attacking. They subsequently retreated slightly, and the rioters hurled petrol bombs. So this shows that it was a premeditated attack. At that time, the police officer was set ablaze. Luckily, he was able to escape. But when he was escaping from the scene, his arm and leg were set ablaze. Rioters even dashed forward, attempting to snatch the gun of the officer who was lying on the ground. Fortunately, the officer remained vigilant and stopped that from happening. But while the officer was asking for reinforcements, and a second petrol bomb was hurled at him, and his legs were set on fire. Rioters launched lethal attacks at police officers, and they were going for the kill. It was a blatant challenge to the rule of law, and it exceeded the bottom line in a civilized society, and such acts should be condemned. I'd like to defer to Mr. Kong to brief us on action figures in the past few days. Since the operation started in early June, 2,363 people were arrested, including 1,847 males and 516 females. They were aged between 12 and 83. The offences include taking part in an unlawful assembly, rioting, possession of offensive weapon, use of facial covering in an unlawful assembly, obstruction of police officers, criminal damage, assault on police officers, use of facial covering in taking part in an unlawful assembly, or not removing facial covering when requested. In the past long weekend, from the 4th to the 7th of October, the police arrested 241 people, including 170 males, and 71 females aged between 12 and 54. They were alleged to have taken part in an unlawful assembly, possession of offensive weapon, using facial covering in an unlawful assembly, and not removing facial covering on request. Since the prohibition on face covering regulation was implemented, 77 people were arrested by the police on offences relating to the regulation, including 50 males and 27 females, aged between 12 and 41. Of those, 74 were suspected to have used facial covering in an unlawful assembly, while another 3 refused to cooperate and remove facial covering when requested, and they were arrested on the offence of not removing facial covering upon request.
For court cases, 1 man and 1 female, in the early morning of Saturday, the 5th of October, set up barricades on roads in Lam-Tin, wearing masks or facial covering. They are arrested for unlawful assembly and use of facial covering in an unlawful assembly. And then the case was mentioned in Eastern Magistrates Court on the 7th of October, Monday. And on the 6th of October, Sunday, in Wan Chai, near Canal Road, 36 persons were arrested, including 18 men and 18 women aged between 12 and 33. Among them, 14 males and 12 females were charged with taking part in a riot. Another 14 are now charged with an additional offence of use of facial covering in an unlawful assembly. The case was mentioned in West Kowloon Magistrates Court this afternoon, i.e. the 10th of October. As at our operation yesterday, over the weekend, 14 police officers were injured on duty. On the 4th of August, a plainclothes police officer was on duty in Yuen Long. He was beaten up by a mob and attacked by petrol bombs. His forehead, his rib cage, and his back were injured. And on the 7th of October, 1 police officer were dispersing the crowd in Tseung Kwan O, and a bike was thrown at him from height, and he fell to the floor and was injured. And then his head suffered severe injuries. As for use of ammunition, on the 4th of October, on Friday, the police launched 175 rounds of tear gas, 65 rounds of rubber bullets, and 40 rounds of sponge bullets, and 22 beanbag rounds. And then Saturday, no ammunition was used. On Sunday, 134 rounds of tear gas, 30 rounds of rubber bullets, and 5 sponge bullets. And then on the 7th of August, Monday, we launched 58 rounds of tear gas, 16 rubber bullets, 1 round of beanbag rounds, and then 3 sponge rounds. As said by Mr. Kwok, the rioters have got more and more violence, and the intention is to murder our officers. They beat up our officers, and they hurled petrol bombs. On the 7th of October at around 9 p.m., that was the case. Our officers were carrying out a dispersal operation at Tong Tat Street, Tseung Kwan O, and suddenly a bike was thrown from above, hitting the head of an officer. Our officer fell to the ground at once. His neck and head was severely injured, and he is now hospitalized. We have to point out that in various districts, rioters are vandalizing shops and banks, and they also resorted to vigilantism to beat up people who hold different views from theirs. The victims indicated that in the process their personal properties were snatched. A mob damaged a shop. Some of the electronic goods, including mobile phones and tablets, were taken away. And the shop found that some of the goods was missing. And then on the 6th of October in the afternoon, a man was dragged out of his car and beaten up by a mob because he held different views. And then he found that some cash and valuable items were stolen. So this is not a behavior to get what they want. Rather, it should be regarded as theft and robbery, and we will take these cases very seriously. And in recent days, we've seen online some footage in a shopping mall in Ma On Shan. Security guards blocked the entrance to the mall, not allowing police officers to come in, and that has sparked discussions in the community. Let me clarify. At around 8 p.m. last night, the police received a report that in most towns there was vandalism in some shops, and some facilities in the Ma On Shan MTR station were also being vandalized. So we responded to the call. We had to go through the shopping mall in order to reach the facilities. Unfortunately, we were stopped by security guards there. We explained again and again that there was a crime, there were crimes going on, and we were still blocked. So we had no choice but to push them away in order to gain entry into the shopping mall.
At that time, more than 30 people gathered in the mall. They were constantly yelling, and they directed laser beams at our officers. So when during the pursuit, one reporter stood in the middle of the road, and he was bumped by our officer, and we later helped the reporter up. We felt regretful that the reporter was bumped, but very often during an operation we might inadvertently, such things might inadvertently happen. This is not the question and answer session yet, Mr. Kong. At that time, the police had to use powers conferred by the law to deal with what happened in the shopping mall. I'm sure in Hong Kong, no one wants to see a scenario in which criminals can take shelter somewhere or anywhere. And on the police force ordinance Cap 232 Section 50, we are empowered with the relevant rights or powers. If arrests are to be made on suspected crimes, we can enter a specific location without a warrant. I would now defer to Mr. Ng to talk about the prohibition on face covering regulation. I would talk about the prohibition on face covering regulation and some enforcement principles of the police on this regulation. Over the past Saturday, that is the 5th of October, this regulation came into force. There were two purposes of this regulation. First of all, in light of the fact that many recent public events escalated into violence, this regulation is to deter crimes conducted by masked individuals, and the second purpose is to facilitate the effective investigation by the police and to put those criminals to justice. And the relevant initiatives have proved popular, and this is a relatively short regulation. There are only 5 sections, and in the interpretation of the relevant sections, we can see this under the Public Order Ordinance Cap 245, additional constraints have been placed on face covering. 2 new offences have been introduced. According to Section 3 of the ordinance, and a person, the first condition is for, it applies when a person is at an unlawful assembly, that is when 2 or more people assemble and the acts conducted could jeopardize social order. And the second condition is an unauthorized assembly, and that is Section 17A2 of the POO. That is a public assembly with more than 50 people or a public procession with more than 30 people that have been objected to or not authorized by the Commissioner of Police. As for an assembly, procession, or gathering with 3 or more people, and 2 further acts are regulated. That is a public meeting that requires notice with 50 or more participants, or a public procession with at least 30 participants and not subject to a notice of no objection. Apart from these 4 scenarios, well, all 4 scenarios are covered by the regulation. So which scenarios are excluded? When a person is not at a location of unlawful assembly or unauthorized assembly, that would not be a violation. And if the number of participants is only 2, it would not be a violation. For peaceful public meetings with less than 30 people or 50 people, or a public procession with less than 30 people, it would not be a violation. And according to Section 4, if there is a reasonable defense, no violation would be committed. According to Section 5 of the ordinance, the police can stop a person from using a facial covering that he believes is likely to prevent identification. The police may request the relevant person to remove the facial covering to enable the officer to verify the identity of the person. That is, if I cover my face in public, it would not be a violation, and an offense would only be committed if the police's request is not followed, and the maximum penalty is 6 months of imprisonment and $10,000. And in various ordinances, such as the Public Orders Ordinance, Immigration Ordinance, etc., the police already has powers to stop and or intercept certain persons, and these 2 regulations only serves to facilitate the police's work and to defer crimes. And according to Sections 3 and 5 of the ordinance, wearing facial coverings such as face masks would not be a violation. The prohibitions only apply to regulated public events. So if you carry or wear a facial mask with you, it would not be a violation. On request by the police, the relevant person can temporarily take off the facial covering or mask to confirm their identity, and after that they can put the covering back on. The interpretation of the regulation ultimately lies with the court. This is a new regulation which has just been implemented for 4 days. The public and legal practitioners might have questions. So at the beginning phase of implementation, through press conferences, the police would try to explain the practice to the public to alleviate doubts. We would also pay attention to the enforcement situation, and when needed, internal guidelines or training might be introduced. As for the effectiveness of the new regulation, like the Chief Executive said this morning, it's still early days and the police would enforce the laws under the new regulation. Over the past weekend, in police operations, and according to reports online, well, I will talk about the main principles. We might not be able to comment on specific cases. First of all, the exemptions enjoyed by the press or volunteer first aiders, according to Section 4 of the regulation, for persons of certain professions or roles in a public event, if there's a need to use facial covering, could be a reasonable excuse, and the interpretation should align with the contents of the ordinance or regulation. And different factors must be considered, including the clothes worn by an individual, the specific acts and the context, the relevant explanation, the presence of proof, etc. In terms of determining the identities of people at the scene, whether they are press, first aiders, or people taking part in an unlawful activity, interrogations would be conducted on the scene, and it would depend on whether the relevant persons can provide a sound explanation.
We have our own rundown. Can we allow another speaker to say something first? Yes, please do not disrupt our rundown. In the past 4 months, we have seen unrest in Hong Kong, and violence has been escalated. On the 9th of October, on the 10th of September, we started a hotline for people to report to us alleged unlawful behavior, and it's been useful in helping us to stop violence. And that goes to show that members of the public would like calm to restore to society. From various channels, we have received requests from the government asking for an hotline to report a non-emergency situation. So we are going to add one new hotline today, and the number is 5333-3103. You may use Line or WeChat to search for us, and you can add +852 +533331. However, the ID is HKPF 53333103. You can also use our email hotline at police.gov.hk to give us intelligence. And we're using common platforms being used by the public and covering the three as I just mentioned. And as for the other platform we used previously, the company did not agree to using that platform, and therefore in this newly launched hotline, that platform will not be included. And we will not use automatic reply to in these social media. And the hotlines are not for reporting crimes. And if you need to report crime, please dial 999. And we have to comply with the personal data privacy regulations. Will not provide information to a third party. Information obtained will be for investigation, detection of crimes, and the purpose of collecting the data, and also the preservation of such data will be in accordance with the code. If the data are no longer needed, or unless they have to be kept under other ordinances, they will be destroyed after a while. We will not create new social media platform to receive information from the public. I'm sure all law-abiding citizens will support the police in helping Hong Kong to restore law and order. And you can also browse our website for details. I now give the floor to Mr. Kwok. Thank you. Let me conclude. In the past 4 months, the violence shown by the rioters have increased in intensity and extensiveness, affecting the law and order of Hong Kong. Many of the arrested persons are students, young people, and even teachers. And this is very worrying. We have to worry for the future of Hong Kong. The police have to point out that no matter how you dislike the current situation, you cannot disregard the law. These rioters claim that they are striving for democracy and freedom. However, they have beaten up people with opposite views and also law enforcement agencies. They use violence to trample on freedom of expression, which we all treasured. Now, if you want to use violence to get what you want, how can you say that you are pursuing a noble cause? We have seen escalating violence over the past weeks, and we don't know where this is going to lead us to. So far, 2 persons have been shot. Journalists, police officers have been burned. If this is to go on, we don't know whether injuries will become more serious. I am with the society on the following view. We don't want people, or we don't want lives to be lost because of the current incident. And what should be our way forward? The police would like to appeal to the community. Now, if you encounter any violence, and if you've seen innocent civilians being beaten up by the rioters, I urge everyone, including the reporters and first aiders, to report to the police as soon as possible. Give us the exact location so that we can arrive to help the victims. I appeal to all sectors of the community. Please do your utmost to help the police to stop the chaos.
Hong Kong has entered its 18th week of social unrest with widespread rioting. Rioters' level of violence has been escalating without showing any sign of abating from week to week, and has reached a very critical level. Masked rioters wreaked havoc across the city and resorted to atrocious acts like wrecking public buildings, damaging and disrupting transport facilities, setting buildings on fire, hurling petrol bombs at police officers and into crowds, and worst of all, attacking innocent citizens holding dissenting views. There are organized groups of masked rioters going around the city to inflict deliberate violence and commit an array of lawless acts. Such ruthless and reckless acts are pushing the rule of law to the brink of total collapse. Here I would like to talk about several alarming observations during the weekend. Firstly, we saw a sharp escalation in vandalism and property destruction. Rioters targeted many retail shops and restaurants, inflicting extensive damage. There are also reports of looting of a mobile phone store. They also wrecked as many as 80 sets of traffic lights on roads and smashed up facilities in numerous MTR stations, leading to a total shutdown of the MTR system. In total, we have recorded 213 cases of vandalism of shops, MTR facilities, public properties and buildings in just 4 days. Secondly, some rioters set up barricades and intercepted passing vehicles on main roads at various locations like Tuen Mun, Tseung Kwan O, and Wong Tai Sin. These illegal roadblocks pose a great danger to road users, and anyone taking part are liable to offences like unlawful assembly and loitering, carrying a penalty of 5-year and 2-year of imprisonment respectively. They may also be liable to criminal intimidation, carrying a penalty of 5-year imprisonment. During our operations, we have arrested 19 people aged 13 to 30 years old, and we'll step up effort to target illegal roadblocks. Thirdly, we are alarmed by a number of cases where rioters viciously beat up people with different views to theirs in districts like Mong Kok and Sham Shui Po, leaving them unconscious with life-threatening injuries. Please do not underestimate the gravity of this development. If the victims of such horrific attacks die from their injuries, all the offenders are liable to prosecution for murder. Fourthly, rioters continue to launch brutal attacks on police officers and in some cases even showing intent to murder our officers. In one open fire incident in Yuen Long on Friday night, one CID officer was dragged out of his car, pushed to the ground and viciously beaten up by a masked mob with weapons. When his life was in grave danger, he fired a shot in an attempt to disperse the rioters. Despite the shot being fired, the rioters continued the savage attacks, hitting him with petrol bombs and even attempting to snatch his revolver, which was dropped on the ground. These are murderous acts that no civilized society could or should tolerate. Now I'll give you a brief update on the arrest figures over the weekend. Between the 4th and the 7th of October, we have arrested 241 people, consisting of 170 males and 71 females, aged between 12 and 54 years. Offences include unlawful assembly, possession of offensive weapon, using facial covering at an unlawful assembly, and failing to comply with the requirement to remove facial covering in a public place. Since the prohibition on face covering regulation came into effect on Saturday, up to this morning we have arrested 77 people, consisting of 50 males and 27 females, aged between 12 and 41 years old. Amongst them, 74 people were arrested for using facial covering at an unlawful assembly, while the remaining 3 were arrested for failing to comply with the requirement to remove facial covering in a public place. In conclusion, over the past 4 months, we have seen an increase in the intensity and extensiveness of violence used by rioters. The violence has intensified with more dangerous weapons and tactics being used, and the atrocity has extended to many different districts in Hong Kong, affecting the livelihoods of most of our law-abiding citizens. We are deeply concerned by the spreading of lawlessness in Hong Kong by rioters who subscribe to the idea that breaking the law to achieve their so-called democratic goals is a noble one. That cannot be true. We sincerely appeal to every member of the public and professional entities to do the right thing, to do whatever is within their power and ability to help the police to stop this madness. 我將以下時間交返俾阿
The speaker is not on the microphone. we are yet to reach the Q&A session. Please raise your hands if you have questions to ask Now TV. This is from Now TV.
喂，聽唔聽？係你好 Now 新聞台嘅，其實咧就係喺灣仔軒尼詩道，即係開散步嘅時候咧，就有前線嘅警員咧就係要求在場嘅記者咧係除低嗰個防護面具，而當時在場咧其實就係啱啱發射咗催淚彈冇耐，啲空氣咧其實好刺鼻嘅。咁除咗要求之外咧，其實有報道都話咧係有一啲前線警員咧甚至係親手扯甩咗幾位記者嘅面罩。咁究竟係就係前線警員唔熟悉新嗰個禁蒙面法嘅豁免條例咧？
The case that frontline officers were not familiar with the provisions of the new regulation, and the press should be protected under the section on defense. Can you promise not to pull off the respirators of frontline reporters? Are you going to apologize to these reporters?
本台咧之前即係有關於荃灣大河道嘅開槍事件啦，咁本台咧其實就係影到啦，係槍傷咗嗰位嘅中學生啦。其實槍傷之後咧，就有另一位警員咧喺附近咧執起咗另一支比較深色嘅鐵枝，就唔係原本拎住嗰支白色嘅鐵枝嚟嘅，即係你哋所講嘅鐵枝啦。咁咧就揸住咗之後咧，就放喺佢附近。另外有另一位同事咧就將屬於嗰位中槍嘅浮板等等保血物體咧，就拎俾嗰位執起咗鐵枝嘅同事。
student and another officer handed the whole metal pole to another officer.
冇影到你哋同事拎起咗。想問其實警方係咪想插贓嫁禍咧？唔該。
Was the police trying to plant some evidence or the object?
咁咧今日就會由我去安排回答問題嘅人手嘅。 咁啊，首先第一條咧有關呢一個嘅要求記者喺個行動當中去除呢個面罩咧，我會交俾阿吳 Sir 去回答啦。咁跟住咧我就會再去解答翻有關荃灣大河道嗰個開槍嘅事件嘅
incident in Tai Ho Road, 荃灣。
好，唔該，江
Sir。Thank you, Mr. Kong.
咁頭先都講解過啦，其實喺即係法例上就有一個叫做免責辯護啦。
There is a defense under the regulation. And I will not repeat the details of the defense here. As said, it's a relatively new regulation, and it takes time for it to be used. The regulation is short, and it's not difficult for officers to understand the provisions. But because it was only introduced less than 4 days ago, I hope we will allow a time for officers to get familiarized with the regulation. There is nothing in the regulation. There is no mention of which profession should be exempted. It just says that when there is a reasonable excuse, then the reporters can claim this defense. If someone claims himself to be a reporter, that doesn't mean that he is not subject to any regulation. Please allow me to explain as far as possible. So the most important thing is it depends on the behavior of the person concerned. If he is doing what a reporter is supposed to do, can you please allow him to finish his explanation? Otherwise, the speaker cannot finish his explanation. All right, I'll go on. If the person is doing something fitting to his status as a reporter, there is no reason for police officers to require him to remove his mask. But let me supplement. How about this? Let the speaker finish his explanation first. So I heard your comments, and I also have to hear from my colleagues difficulties in implementing the regulation. If need be, I can give more guidelines for our frontline officers in this teething period. Can you allow them some time to familiarize? Well, Now, if he is pointing his pepper spray at us and he removes our face mask, what are we supposed to do? What can we do to protect our safety? Now, this is cable TV's time. Well, we do have our rules here. Can Mr. Ng continue to answer cable TV's question? Well, as I said, well, these are exceptional times, and we need to cooperate as far as possible so that we can resolve the difficulties together. Now, this is now's time. Please give me time. Well, I am answering your question very seriously. Well, am I supposed to remove my mask? But I just don't want to be pepper sprayed. As simple as that. Well, I'm just telling you the procedures and law as regards implementation. Well, the regulation was only introduced shortly ago, and please give us some time. Yes, thank you, Mr. Kong. I was present. We were trying to cover what your colleagues were doing after subduing the protesters. We were wearing our reflective vests, so we had our passes. So on what basis will you ask reporters wearing their vests and also their passes to remove their mask? Are you going to apologize to us? And we admit that you didn't give sufficient guidelines to your frontline officers. From now on, if we are asked to remove our mask, what should we do? I'm from the PPRB. I can explain to you. We have to admit that the past 4 months, the situation has gone more chaotic. And as said by the journalists, our colleagues might be dealing with arrested persons, and they might be worried that they would be attacked by other rioters. And in the past few weeks, we have seen people trying to snatch arrested persons from us. So our colleagues have to ensure that there is a safety distance for us to effect our arrests. I heard your concern about the new regulation, and Mr. Ng said that under the new regulation, there is a defense. There are reasonable excuses. I've said in this PC and on other occasions that under Section 4, there is a defense, and all professional journalists should be covered. However, as said by Mr. Ng, the law only came into effect 4 days ago, and we need time to familiarize ourselves with the regulation to ensure that our colleagues have a better understanding of the clause on defense. A reporter mentioned just now, which I agree, if when you're at work, you should display your reporter's pass that can help to reduce misunderstanding. We will welcome such a move. Because we've mentioned in previous PCs that when we are working, there are bound to be fake reporters around, and their attire has made it difficult for us to confirm whether they are genuine or otherwise reporters. We can guarantee that with this new regulation, we will enhance the understanding of our colleagues on the defense provision so as to reduce misunderstanding. When it comes to implementation, there is no intention on our part to cause unnecessary harm or hardship to any party. And now I go on to the second question. Regarding the open fire incident in Tai Ho Road, Tsuen Wan, I won't repeat the details of the case because Mr. Wong gave you details. At a previous PC, he outlined the arrest details to you, but I can say categorically here that the so-called short pole mentioned in reports, in fact, it is a white metal pole. We were dealing with a riot, and we're at the scene of assault of police officers. Our CID officers were at a crime scene, and we seized not just that white metal pole and not just that so-called 4-foot metal pole. Anyway, it's a 4-foot pole. I don't know what's the material. And we also seized some floating boards and bricks and metal poles. We have to prove in our investigation that it is a scene of a riot. And we've never said that all exhibits seized belong to the wounded victim or wounded protester. That protester is now charged, and you can rest assured all the exhibits and also facts of the case will be made public in an open trial. So we will not do anything to prejudice the cause of justice. Even after the victim or the injured was taken away, the rioters were still there. And according to my colleagues, they wanted to deal with the crime scene. Unfortunately, another batch of mob came back to assault our police officers, and our officers had no choice but to grab all likely exhibits present, and they had to leave the soonest possible for fear of further assaults from the mob. CNA? CNA?
Hi, I have one question on 3 questions. One on the anti-mask law. Can I just ask, from an enforcement point of view, would you say from your initial assessment, would you say that the anti-mask law has helped police officers deal with protests, given that many people are out in the streets, or has it made it more difficult for you? My second question is, so far, based on the number of injuries and the type of injuries of your officers, what is the most serious? And retrospectively, would it be justifiable for police officers in those circumstances to fire to prevent those injuries? And my last question is, can I ask whether the Hong Kong Police Force has touched base with or exchanged views or information with PLA or your mainland counterparts regarding protests? And Mrs. Carrie Lam has also said that she doesn't rule out asking China for help, and if and when that happens, how ready is the force to work with China to deal with the protests? And also, what are the likely arrangements between both parties? Thank you.
Okay. For the first question, I will hand the floor to Mr. Ng, and I will answer the second question, and then I will hand over the floor to Mr. Kwok for the last question. Mr. Ng, please.
Thank you. As I mentioned in Cantonese, actually the police will welcome all the legislation or lawful measures which can help us to enforce the law, and the most important goal is to make Hong Kong peaceful again. So I think this is one that the law has just been enacted for less than 4 days. I think we still need time to improve on how it operates, or to collect views, or to see how it works. But I think definitely, if there's a law, I think it will help us.
For the second question, I do not have the accurate information in hand, but according to the past press conference, we have mentioned the following serious injury suffered by our officer, including one of our officers were kicked on his head, which caused a serious bone fracture at his face. And in another incident, our officers as well as some reporters were thrown with some corrosive liquid, which caused serious burn on his limb and as well as his body. And for the last example that I would like to quote is like the incident happened in the last weekend in Yuen Long, in which one of our plainclothes constable who was thrown twice with petrol bombs. According to our guidelines and orders, whenever our officers encountered threats of serious bodily harm or bodily injuries or even life-threatening attack, we are justified to use our firearm. I think it is crystal clear that for the three examples that I have quoted previously are all justified incidents that we could use our firearm to stop this kind of seriously violent acts. And I'll hand forward to Mr. Kwok.
Thank you. According to the national law and the basic law, the authority to turn out the People's Liberation Army rests with the Central People's Government as well as the Hong Kong government. The Hong Kong police is both capable and determined to restore public safety and order. If you look at our track record, you will note that we have been capable of keeping Hong Kong's crimes under control, and the overall crime rate dropped to its lowest in 45 years last year. In fact, Hong Kong was ranked amongst the top 5 in the globe in terms of safety and security, according to some international studies. According to the World Economic Forum, Hong Kong was ranked number 6 globally in terms of reliability of police services. This shows that we are and have always been competent in keeping Hong Kong safe and stable. We are committed to performing our very best in containing the social unrest and helping Hong Kong to get back to normal. The past few weeks' unrest, we are facing unprecedented challenge. Shall I say we're facing a very formidable enemy. But we believe with the help from all sectors of the society, we will be able to deal with it by ourselves, by Hong Kong society, not by police alone, but by the Hong Kong society altogether. For that reason, I will leave the decision or any comment on the involvement of PLA back to our Hong Kong government, and we, as the police, will not comment further. Thank you.
Hong Kong Economic Times. I'd like to follow up on the question from Now TV. Some reporters had their masks removed by police officers. I'd like to know whether the police are going to apologize. Do you find that move justified and reasonable and appropriate? And since the introduction of the prohibition of face covering regulation, I'd like to know in what ways have you been briefing your frontline officers, and who is responsible for doing the briefing? Now, if you have done or if you've briefed your officers, how come there was that incident of police officers removing the masks of reporters? And we heard from the police officers that journalists do not enjoy any privilege. Does that mean that your briefing was not effective at all? And there are rumors that last night in Yuen Long, you arrested an off-duty ambulance officer wearing a face mask. Reportedly, he was not feeling well, and although he was not in uniform, I think the reason he gave should be regarded as a reasonable excuse. How come he was arrested regardless? And why did you have to search his place of work? Can you give us the reasons, please? And on the 1st of October, it was videotaped that police officers threw a rubbish bin from a footbridge down to the road. Earlier on, rioters threw trash can onto the police vehicle, and then you condemn that as being a life-threatening behavior. So I'd like to know the reason why your officers did the same on the 1st of October. Was it in line with your guidelines? The throwing of a trash can from height, well, you call that a life-threatening behavior. Do you have double standards in this regard?
The first two questions are related to the anti-mask law. I would defer to Ms. Ng, and then I would take the last question on the incident on the 1st of October. Ms. Ng, please. From an investigation perspective, to have a complete investigation, we must examine all the relevant information because different people would have different perspectives. Given the finite information available, while I wasn't at the scene, so I cannot offer full comments. Like we said in the opening address, the regulation has been implemented only a few days ago, and in the last 3 days, there were various public events which were violent in at different locations of Hong Kong. It's never easy to implement a new law. So in a perfect world, our officers would undergo a training day. Unfortunately, over the last 3 days, operationally, it was not possible. I'm answering the question. And as such, through internal guidelines, we would offer information to frontline officers and their teams. This is a new regulation. But in terms of the main content or principles of the regulation, they are nothing new, and I believe our officers would be able to understand at least some of the content. We will continue to solicit views from our colleagues or officers. We would welcome any suggestions that would streamline our efficiency. Please allow Mr. Kwok to continue with his answer. We have nothing to add on the first question. When arresting the off-duty first aider that night, our officers were dealing with illegal roadblocks at that time, and we intercepted certain individuals, including the person in question. They were arrested for an offense under Section 5 of the new ordinance or regulation, that is failure to remove facial covering on request. So this is irrelevant to the presence of any defense, because when we were dealing with the incident, we did not know whether other individuals might be related to the setting of illegal roadblocks, and that's why they were stopped and questioned. He was requested to remove his mask, and he refused, and as such, he was arrested for... let me put it this way. He did not remove facial covering on request, so whether he was sick at that time was immaterial. We were trying to ascertain his identity at that time. So if he had a mask on, we could not ascertain his identity. So let's make this very clear. As to whether his office or home were searched, I think this is a matter of privacy, so I would not divulge further. As for the incident on the 1st of October, at that time, at Wan Chai and Hennessy Road, rioters set a large number of illegal roadblocks and hurled petrol bombs. They also hurled bricks and stones at our offices. According to the information on hand, our officers were carrying out dispersal actions. As for the location you mentioned, we understand it was the footbridge on O'Brien Road of Wan Chai. Our officers were discharging their duties at that time. As to whether there were any cordon lines on the footbridge or underneath it, we would have to find out. According to the online footage, if a litter bin is thrown from the footbridge, it is a very dangerous act. If anyone passes by, serious injuries can result. So we would try to find out about the incident. If any of our officers is proved to have committed illegal or inappropriate acts, action would be taken. The speaker is not on the microphone. You said time is needed to get familiar with the new regulation. So is it the police's approach to just arrest more people or everyone first? As for the litter bin that was dropped, so can you actually identify the specific police officer, or you would wait till complaints are filed? Are you going to proactively launch an investigation? We have nothing to add on the anti-mask law. Before our officers begin work every day, there would be a morning briefing. And like Mr. Ng said, the new regulation has only been put in place for 4 days. We will constantly seek to improve the actual enforcement on the ground, or what has to be done in order to more efficiently enforce the law. So in terms of the enforcement of the law, we will certainly discuss this with our operations staff. As for the incident you mentioned on the 1st of October, if anyone witnessed the incident at the site, we hope they would step forward by lodging complaints or furnishing information so that we can follow up. Like I said, we would proactively look into the matter. R3.
RTHK English News. First question on the anti-mask law. Can you promise that reporters won't be asked to remove masks or will be arrested at the protest scenes in future, especially after tear gas are released? And you mentioned that this is such a short law. So why are officers taking such a long time, and why are they still so unfamiliar with this law? And are officers basically abusing this new power you have, or are you slapping John Lee, your superior, in the face? How long will it take before you guys are familiar with a law that you are enforcing? Second question, you have condemned protesters for taking the law into their own hands and basically attacking people. But your officers were filmed kicking a man in his chest and also striking his back with fists multiple times when they make an arrest in Shanpo Kong. So that seems to have gone beyond basically subduing the man. And yesterday, a police car deliberately drove into a crowd of protesters. Can you please explain these two incidents to us? Third question, can you explain the incident in which riot police rushed into a mall despite being barred from security guards? And I'm protesting here because you mentioned this in your opening remarks in Chinese, but didn't in English, and you spent time talking about information you said in your previous statement, and we much prefer that you don't do that in future. Thank you.
Okay. For the first question relating to the new legislation, I will hand the floor to Mr. Ng, and then I will answer the rest of the questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. As mentioned in Cantonese before, actually in the ordinance itself, there's a statute section regarding the defense. So maybe I just repeat a little bit to make it more clear. So the defense is a defense for a person charged with an offense under this section. That means wearing a mask at those unlawful or regulated events. To establish that at the time of the alleged offense, the person had lawful authority or reasonable excuse. So following on in subsection 2, it mentioned that a person is taken to have established that she had reasonable excuse, I would say, for using face covering if there's sufficient evidence to raise an issue and the contrary is not proved. And lastly, is the person was engaged in a profession or employment and was using that covering for physical safety. So the keywords should be profession and employment and physical safety. So I think the law is not written as it mentioned like it cannot cover all the occupations or what. I think this is in principle. So it mentions about the profession and employment. And in our view, reporters, genuine reporters doing genuine reporting at the scene will be covered. Okay. My answer to that is that police will abide to the law and we will act according to the law. We cannot give any promise out with the law. So we will just act according to the law.
And why are police officers still so unfamiliar with this short law? That was also my question.
As mentioned before, the law has just been enacted for less than 4 days. And I think even for ourselves, even for all the citizens in Hong Kong, we need time. So that's why we make use of this opportunity to try to explain a little bit more so that everybody will get more familiarized with it.
And I personally think that it is unfair to comment that the law is simple because it has only a few sections. Because I have seen a lot of examples in which different legislations will be discussed and argued, even to the Court of Final Appeal, which is a very complicated process. So I do not want to comment whether a particular legislation is simple or not. And for the second question about the incident happened in Sampo Kong on the 6th of October. Actually, in that afternoon, a group of over 200 protesters, most of them are wearing in black, gathered outside King Fuk Street and Prince Edward Road East, during which they are shouting, blocking the roads, and also acting disorderly. And during the arrest, police chased after over 10 protesters and eventually intercept one of them. And during our arrest, this male had put up the serious struggle in which he resists our officers to handcuff him. So in the process, our officer had used minimum force to subdue him so that we could handcuff this arrested person and to have total control of him. Because as I have mentioned numerous times, during the past few weeks, we encounter a number of occasions in which when our officers were making arrests, the other protesters or rioters intervene and try to attack our officers and try to obstruct our officers to execute their duty to subdue different arrested persons. And for this particular case, actually, we have received 2 complaints regarding the use of force in this incident, and we will follow up this complaint. About the last question on the entrance.
The police car incident I also mentioned in my second question.
For this one, I do not have any information in hand, or maybe you could put up your question through newsroom, or you could enlighten me with some more details. or otherwise, I better answer the last question first. And for the last question about the incident happened last night in Ma On Shan at a shopping mall. Actually, police receive reports about that someone made damages to the shops in this shopping mall, as well as to the Ma On Shan MTR station facilities. Responding to these police calls, our officers actually intend to enter this shopping mall as well as to access to the MTR station so as to respond to the 999 call. However, during the process, the security guard of this shopping mall stopped us from entering this shopping mall. And I have to reiterate here about the statutory power given to the police for the entrance of these kinds of venues. It is under the Chapter 233, the Police Force Ordinance, Laws of Hong Kong, actually under the Section 50, in particular, subsection 3 and 4. If our police officer reasonably believes that somebody who will be arrested are inside any particular venue, we have the statutory power to enter this venue to effect the arrest, no matter we have an arrest warrant or not. And I think that's all I would like to talk about for this question. I think this is appropriate for me to watch the video at this occasion. Maybe we could answer this question in our next press conference.
First of all, are there any police officers from the mainland China or members of the People's Armed Police working as part of the Hong Kong Police Force in Hong Kong? And second of all, Mr. Ng said that in a perfect world, officers would have undergone a training day in regards to this new mask law. Are you suggesting that your officers are currently undertrained in handling this new law? The second question. Yeah, you previously mentioned that in a perfect world, officers would have undergone a training day regarding the new law. So are you now suggesting that officers are undertrained in handling this new law?
Okay, thanks for the question. For the first question, I will hand over the floor to Mr. Kwok, and then Mr. Ng will answer the question about the new legislation.
Well, let me categorically tell you that there is absolutely no truth in any allegation or accusation of the PLA being inside the police force. We don't need that, and we will not need that. It hasn't happened. So that is absolutely not true. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mentioned before that this new regulation is relatively short in length, and most of the ideas were making reference to the existing public order ordinance, which a lot of police officers are familiarized with. And that's why we think that they will grab hold of the ideas or the crux of the new legislation, a new regulation. And but as I think this is common or natural that for any new legislation or new thing, none of our officers or none of everyone here has any experience on it. So I think in the beginning we do need time to study more or to understand more. And also, if there's any comments from our officers or from others, then I will of course take into consideration. The ultimate aim is to facilitate our execution of the duties, and also to avoid any misunderstanding. And the most importantly is the purpose of this legislation. It's not about this is not targeting any occupation or any profession, and this is targeting and those violent protesters who are making use of covering their face and do all the violent acts, and to stop or try to prevent the police from identifying them. I think this is the crux of the issue that we need to address.
Last question.
Maybe let me supplement a bit for the questions asked by the CNN. Actually, I have mentioned in my answer through Cantonese that actually, apart from the formal training that we would arrange to our officers, actually, please rest assured that we will try our best to make continuous improvement to execute this new regulation through our daily briefing or debriefing before and after our every operation.
Last question for the day. AM 7:30. There hasn't been a press conference for 6 days already. AM 7:30, please. Like you said, since the new law was enacted, 77 people were arrested on the new law. You said that more guidelines would be provided to the frontline officers. That means your frontline officers are not yet familiar, and yet 77 people have been arrested. How can you ensure that your officers would enforce the law after or only after they are familiar with it? According to online footage yesterday, some incidents occurred in Hong Kong. Some of your officers went into an altercation with Hong Kong residents, and one of the officers drew his gun. I'd like to know what happened at that time, which warranted the drawing of a gun by the officer. As for the anti-mask law, I would defer to Ms. Ng, and I would talk about the Hong Kong incident. Thank you.
其實呢個蒙面法就頭先都講咗，咁我好簡單就 recap 翻就係話。
I would offer a brief recap on the anti-mask law. As for the spirit of the law, our officers have experience dealing with the public order ordinance. But for any new law, there might be aspects that our officers are not familiar with, so we would try to explain it to the public as well as the press and our officers. The law is very clear. If you have read it, the legal provisions are brief and clear. If you want to know more, information is available on the website of the Security Bureau. Please allow me to continue. And our officers have experience enforcing the POO, so they are familiar with it. And we would try to solicit more views with an aim to constantly improve. As for the first question, like I said in my reply in English, for any new law or regulation, apart from dealing with it from an operational perspective, we would also deal with possible prosecutions on court for new law and existing laws at the Court of Final appeal. Well, it takes time to allow full interpretation or understanding. But like we said, the law is very clear. And sections 3 and 5 would contain provisions on making arrests, and so arrests were not certainly made in an ambiguous manner. As for the Hong Kong incident, at about 9 p.m. last night, a group of people set up roadblocks at Tek Men Street, and they conducted criminal damage on MTR facilities, and as such, our officers had to conduct a crackdown, and at about 11 p.m. last night, after our crackdown, rioters and protesters appeared again and set roadblocks. So our officers had to go back for another round of operation. At that time, we were facing a group of violent protesters. Our officers were preparing to leave, and in the meantime, our police vehicles were subject to the hurling of objects like bottles and bricks, so we decided to get off our vehicles and disperse these rioters. And later, the rioters kept throwing various objects at our officers, and they surrounded us. At that time, our officers felt that the fact that they were being surrounded and hurled at could result in serious physical injury to our staff, and as such, an officer drew his gun, but he did not point the gun at anyone. He was pointing the gun at the ground. Some of our officers deployed pepper spray at the scene and successfully dispersed the violent protesters who were closest to them. And after the operation, the officer withdrew his gun.